All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. I do educational videos, and we try to shed light on some great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, tour de forces, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, earth-shattering discoveries that you probably have never heard of. Things that are pretty obscure, but if you dig deep into it, you will find your treasure. And we do this so that we hope that you can use these videos for help with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. Today is the 20th video that we've done on 29th video we've done on It's After the End of the World. Don't you know that yet? And this is a history of two groups of underground jazz musicians in Chicago in the 50s and 60s who attempted to articulate a different kind of music, a different kind of profession for them, a different kind of vocation for them, as more of a healer and spiritual leader, as opposed to an entertainer or an artist. And we are in the epilogue here, which is primarily autobiographical, but we do get into some different subjects having to do with the music itself, but this is also just intended for a kind of paradigm shifting architecture or foundation. Okay, my graduate studies also pushed along my teaching skills. Given that my mother was a lifelong educator and my father was a military officer who trained to be a teacher and who had many siblings who had been teachers, it was somewhat in my heritage to be a teacher. I had extensive experience as a camp counselor and babysitter, but in graduate school I began to become a regular teacher, and I began to take my responsibility seriously. I began to think of my running mission in terms of a messenger, a runner for a radical but to me obvious conception of the truth. My running also needed to be linked to the music I was studying. As part of my symbolic strategy, I had combined running with esoteric practices with creative music into an extended ritual that was designed to send me to the very margins of society. A design so that once I ascended all the way up the mountain, so to speak, I would have a message for humanity and other beings. My running mission was predicated upon me having a message. The idea was to write a book or other communication, but use my running as inspiration or even lightning rod of ignominy to persuade people to read the book, watch the video, play the game board, or whatever. But before all of that, it was necessary for me to put together a sustained program to build that communication. And that was the idea of the breathing exercise meditation. I must have discovered accidentally how, after a very difficult workout, cannabis would affect me in an amplified way. It was like a mirror effect. The more I had conquered pain through acceptance and appreciation in the workout, the more power or inverse power I had to let go into the music in my cannabis trance. What I did was to promise myself discipline. I would use the cannabis only after having done a set amount of silent meditation, a workout, a certain amount of yoga as a minimum or prerequisite. And the workout started at basically the equivalent of a 10K run, but then it was moved up to the equivalent of a 10-mile run. And that's like 45 minutes of yoga and 50 minutes of meditation. Approximately, the numbers have gone up and down. Practically speaking, this meant that I would only use cannabis once per day. These minimums have, it just says it's since been raised by about 50%. After that's since 1998, and then the whole thing started in 1992 or 3. So 5 years before that, it was started at the 10K run, and then from 1998, it's been up to the 10-mile run. Now, that doesn't mean that it is a 10-mile run. It's 10-mile equivalent. So if you're talking about using a machine or an exercise bike or a road bike, there would be an equivalent that you would have to make between, depends on the speed that you're going, but, 2 to 3 miles of biking equals 1 mile of running, that kind of thing. Okay, then after using cannabis, I promised to perform a 10 to 12 minute disciplined breathing exercise. So all of these elements in my life fit together in a cycle that lasted about 3 to 4 hours per day. And it took priority over all else, including having a job. My warrior training was designed to lay a foundation, and the key was the breathing exercise timed. With the evolution of these practices, I can at least describe a typical day. Wake up, empty the bowels, and prepare for the day. 40 to 50 minute silent meditation, 65-minute run on the roads, treadmill or elliptical. And then some yoga. 50 to 80-minute meditation, cannabis, and then with time breathing exercise and listening to the music, creative music. Then in the evening, another session of yoga. And yeah, so that's been since 1992 or so. The most crucial aspect of the creative ritual running cycle is the disciplined breathing exercise, which is evolving into the microcosmic orbit, which was the fulcrum of the practice. Even though it was only 10 to 12 minutes, it was the element that balanced everything I was doing, linking teaching, music, history, mystical spirituality, and symbolism and competition or strategy. The purpose of the breathing exercise was increase my breath control and capacity, and also to overcompensate for the possible damage that the sacrament allegedly did to my lungs. I took fruit for the same reason. But then the fruit kind of turned into the steroids. So, but the purpose of the timed breathing exercise was to test me, to force myself into competing when I least wanted to, because of all the relaxed euphoria I was experiencing, competing when I most wanted to just chill out. According to my pre-warrior lifestyle, getting stoned was a way to unwind, to escape, to relax into the comfortable pleasure of the high, and into the depths of inspiration, imagination. The object, as the object of my meditation, is to pay attention to now, where the breath is and where the music is. To stay in the present tense, no matter what, in spite of all the distractions. Um, the timed breathing exercise was an attempt to force myself to be vigilant, to pay attention under difficult circumstances, to pay attention not to get distracted. At the same time, I kept score, or tried to, of my success or failure in doing this competitive exercise. I set up an elaborate algorithm in order to determine whether I won the breathing exercise or not. I rarely did. The original exercises were initially taken from yoga breathing exercises, but then I adapted them for this procedure. I did that exercise in that form for about 16 years. I kept score every day for about 8. This all kind of reminds me of the Buckminster Fuller phrase "guinea pig bee." And there is a long history of scientists, alchemists from back in the day who they had to test their theories on something, so they tested them on themselves. And there's some famous scientists who actually died because they tried something and it was poisonous. And that happened probably quite frequently among, prehistoric. The exercise measured my ability to keep time and to make decisions. The objective of the time breathing exercise was to secure myself into a state of waking trance, which it succeeded in doing almost every time. As I paid more and more attention, I was in the process of climbing the tree, starting with the inspiration/imagination that I was now more open to, then into refining those images through a matrix of elevation through the 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 3rd spheres of the tree of life. I took the things that inspire my imagination and abstract my ego from them, discipline them with repeated sacrifice, requiring an exercise of the will. My inspiration and imagination were then plugged into a mission, and that mission divided itself into a myriad of stages. All of these pieces were then imagined. How could I execute each task connected with the stages? Each task would inevitably scare me, and the object for my will at this point was to act, even if I was afraid to act. These exercises gave me the chance to rehearse the act that I was afraid of, which, when the time came, would give me the will to do it. Even if I failed in these instances, it was still rewarding, even exhilarating to try. These pressurized rehearsals helped me to keep my heart emotions manifesting still, to keep my heart still, so that I would not be too scared, too tense. I learned to appreciate rather than dread challenges to exercise my will. Further, I was also led into the lengthy process of improving with an eye on eventually perfecting my will. At first, I was just trying to prove my will to myself. The sacrifices would start with changes of habit. Later, my sacrifice would involve exposing my radical experiences and subsequent beliefs to the public, even though I knew I would be ridiculed. It was necessary to demonstrate truth and justice to myself and other beings, not to tell or preach the truth to others, but to demonstrate it in my own life. By this time, I would be able to keep my heart still for this, because I believed in it enough to let my concept of the truth compete with the consensus version and all of their resources. I felt that if both were given a hearing in the same space, I could speak the word and the truth would come out for others to witness. Then, once I could keep my heart even more still, I would be able to actually go and present in front of my so-called enemies. This skill has built up slowly over the course of the exercises. So this is like the equivalent, the presenting to your friends and family or acquaintances or whatever that's a fifth sphere on the tree of life or the creative historical model. And then this is a fourth sphere thing, presenting in front of my enemies. This skill is built up slowly over the course. Well, it seems like that could actually be more of a sixth sphere thing and a fifth sphere thing. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of distracted there. Okay, let's keep going. During the exercises, however, I was continually tested to stay away from the fears, paranoias, and even inspirations that entered my heart in order to get further into the breathing than into the music. Through listening to the music in waking trance, I believed I gained access to a part of the causal world. The music gave me a chance to channel history directly from the musicians, a primary source and a violation of time. But during the breathing exercise, I was forced to concentrate on the 50 or 10 breaths right in front of me. This is the space where I had to remain absolutely still, even if a great truth or strategy was revealed to me. At least occasionally, I learned to still the thought process and still the perception process to become one with my breath. Incidentally, you might want to look at the videos, 100 or so, that I did on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, which goes into Buddhist meditation in great detail, and two kinds of meditation. Really, this is kind of a combination of both, but the two kinds, the concentration meditation on an object and vipassana or insight meditation on opening to the five sense doors, and then and the mental door, so 6 doors, and then following all of your sensations, and examining all of them for the 3 characteristics of no self, impermanence, and dissatisfactoriness. And through doing that, you cycle through stages of insight. I guess the key thing here that I would say is that probably a lot more improvement would have happened with more concentrated time spent meditating, like as opposed to doing it every day, a certain amount of, an hour and a half a day. Do it half an hour a day and stack all those other hours into a retreat where you do like 10 to 12 to 15 to 18 hours a day of meditation for a 10-day period or a 20-day period, and you can improve, you can just build up some incredible more momentum so that you can kind of break through some of the barriers to that cycle of insight. You can make progress on it instead of just kind of being on a hamster wheel with it. Okay, a larger issue that I was dealing with here was that of competition. From as far back as I could remember, the society had conditioned me to be a professional athlete. Life for me was set up around winning and losing, and I expended great amounts of time every day over the years imagining different scenarios of athletic success. These were sacrificed in the breathing exercise. The idea was to compete as devotion to dwelling within, and for 10 to 12 minutes, a time probably longer than my running race, or the time of absolutely intense exertion in a longer race, to be judged according to that standard for the acknowledgement of no other. I didn't conceive, So while giving up the claim to other competition, like pickup basketball, so I had to learn to compete only in something that was very painful and that I usually lost. Humbling. Like most sports, I kept a thorough record of the score, of the winning and the losing, and I would try to prognosticate my success in these endeavors. So 3 parts were measured by the breathing exercise: my ability to keep track of time in 2 different measurements, and my ability to estimate my ability to do these things. When I first began, the breathing exercise was torturous. Cannabis hastens at this dosage the imagination, which can easily lead to paranoia, and this paranoia threatened to get out of control during the breathing exercise. Music often conjured scary images, and it was up to me to keep my heart still, or else I would lose count, or I would go way too fast or way too slow. Many times, these almost entirely imaginary scenarios would take me to points beyond myself where I lost control of the very mechanics of my breathing, or I became so afraid that I would become convinced that if I continued to do the exercise that I would perish right there on the mat. This happened numerous times. A fear that someone with a gun was breaking in, or that a poisonous insect had just bitten me, or that the house was on fire. During these times, I had to keep my heart still and ignore the fear, convincing myself that everything was all right simply because the Creator dwelled within me. Altogether, some of these episodes struck me as quite heroic afterward, but the heroics were not enough to constitute success. Much more often, I would fall prey to very mundane and hardly stressful minutiae that would take me right out of the exercise too. Then, once I fell out of keeping track in the now, it was up to my decision-making ability to save my competition. Even if I was traveling through my imagination instead of keeping track of my breathing, I could still win the exercise by estimating the amount of time that had expired and ending the breathing then. As the results indicate, I was not proficient at making correct guesses either. Another important element of the breathing exercise was the aspect of playing with pride. Many times I would err at the beginning of the breathing exercise and lose early in the competition. The object then was to continue to play and try to do well, not because I was keeping score, but because I was doing this as an offering. Some days I would rise to this challenge and keep track. Other times I would check out and fall into and out of trance. Even this struggle, however, was a partial victory, since at least I completed the breathing exercise, which I always did. I practiced and recorded the breathing exercise for over 8 years, but the data recorded here is for 1,618 days, because 4.4 years is as long as the average pro sports career, but mainly because it was a 5 fractal number that can be good for finding patterns. I could see clearly that trance was a major factor in this competition. This completely overlooked the fact in our society and our history. This completely overlooked fact in our society and our history becomes readily apparent at a situation like the breathing exercise, where the point of awareness has to go deeper and deeper into the breath. Under these conditions, it is easy to see that we slip into and out of trance. Our mind often tricks us into it, and we slip in and out of trance all day long. Often it is a long time after we slip into trance that we succeed in recognizing that we're in trance and slipping out. In this way, we often do not notice the decisions we are and are not making. It may seem like we are executing free will, but in reality, we have just fallen into a script, a role that was programmed into us years or decades before. For me, it was the act of observing my inability to focus that led me to cultivate an historical focus more in tune with the subtle but obvious facts about trances and their consequences. The result for me is kind of inverted history, one that provides the same basic facts, adding the hidden facts about trances to come up with a radical historical narrative that cuts against the grain, against gravity. This history also reflects the uphill climb I made to the very margins of society so that I could observe and scrutinize these taken for granted elements of history. At some point on this journey, it became after the end of the world for me. I perceived the sources of problems in the world, and I knew I was living in a world I did not believe in, a world in which I wanted to minimize my participation so that I would not be responsible for its ultimate fate. At this time, I knew that I must build an alternative view of history that I could believe in and offer to share that view with others. I was trying to influence people to wake up and realize that the current world is not sustainable and not a real option, to convince them to give up our lives, our careers, our dramas, and instead strive to create the blueprint for a new world and or die trying. There wasn't anything else worth doing, I felt. This was the motivation for my running and all my rituals, and this was the path that I pursued for about 4 years until I discovered that other people had already accomplished much of what I set out to do. When I discovered Sun Ra and others had done this decades earlier, I recognized that my job was much easier. I just had to harmonize my system with their system or systems. And that's where the breathing exercise comes in. And then observe them as closely as possible so that I could translate it as accurately as possible. Indeed, the musicians put the elements in place. All that was needed was the energy to get the music to people in such a way that they would have a reason to listen. Over the last 7 years, I've tried to accomplish this in a number of ways. Could my running mission help to spread creative music more widely? Even without the direct influence of the running, I have attempted to spread the ideas of creative music through my own music, my DJing, my dissertation, the breathing exercise, my teaching in the classroom and in private, and my collaborations with others. I hope to accelerate the pace of these disseminations in the near future. Okay, I think this is going to get into the history class that was referred to earlier, and I think this is kind of a we'll have to see whether we want to do this or not, but I'll try to figure that out overnight, and we'll come back and we'll be finishing this up in a couple days, and then I think we're going to, there might be a short another short work put in here, but I think we're going to get into Bible decodes, and I think we might start by reading a book called the Dead Sea Scrolls Deception, and look into that's kind of the main thrust of the Bible decodes, is to stay with the text of the Bible, stay within the text, but also weave in other context. I think most Christians, and even the evangelicals and so on, it's like they learn the Bible a verse at a time, or they cite scripture, which is just like a couple verses taken out of the whole book. So I think that we really need to read the whole book, or at least the whole Testament, and try to figure out what it's saying using multiple different ciphers of decoding. And one of those, I think, powerful ciphers of decoding is through the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947 in Qumran, which is only 10 or 15 miles from Jerusalem. And historians have been in dispute as to their dating, but the final date is usually 68 AD. Some people say they go all the way back to the 3rd century BC. Some people say that they were all written in the 1st century AD, or at least the 1st century BC and AD. And there's a lot of material in the Dead Sea Scrolls that is repeated in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the Gospels. Not just the Gospels, though. So the Dead Sea Scrolls deception might lay down a little bit of that foundation. And but we're going to go through the Bible, and then we're going to bring this other stuff in when it's relevant. And I think it'll be good exercise, because I think that people ask, oh well, there's this way of decoding it, there's this way of seeing it. You can see the events as literal, you can see the events as historical, you can see the events as, oh well, mostly historical with some exaggeration